When a quiet boy standing in a library corner finally spoke, the first words out of his mouth sent chills down the librarian's spine. What seemed like an innocent case of shyness soon took a sinister turn as hidden pieces unraveled, revealing a dark truth, one that put his life in unimaginable danger. This is a story of betrayal, resilience, and the relentless fight for justice. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe the truth should always come to light, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Mr. Rhodes had always found solace in the gentle hush of the school library. For nearly 2 decades, he had walked its aisles, straightened its shelves, and listened for the eager whispers or quiet sighs of students who found refuge among the books. He was a man of slender build, well into his 50s, with a salt and pepper mustache that curved neatly over his lip. He wore sweater vests in the winter and short-sleeved button-downs in the summer. Rarely did he attract much attention. He preferred it that way, never seeking the limelight. The library, after all, was a sanctuary for those who craved peace. On a Friday in early fall, Mr. Rhodes stood behind the thick oak desk, which displayed a small, chipped nameplate, Andrew Rhodes, Librarian. The fluorescent lights above occasionally buzzed, a slight annoyance he had grown used to ignoring. That day, as he scanned the room with a practiced eye, he noticed the same thin boy who had been coming in every lunchtime for the past 2 weeks. The boy was Jonah. Though Mr. Rhodes hadn't yet confirmed his name in those early days, he only recognized the face, the posture, the unwavering tension in the child's shoulders. Jonah lingered near the nonfiction aisle, in the far back corner where shelves of old encyclopedias and outdated reference books gathered dust. The area saw few visitors, so Mr. Rhodes found the boy's consistent presence there both odd and intriguing. Jonah stood with his backpack strapped to his slight frame, as though he worried someone might snatch it at any moment. Even more concerning, he never opened a book. He merely stood, gazing intently at the spines, or stared at the ground, his expression caught in a kind of half-frown. That day, Mr. Rhodes tried to catch Jonah's eye. Perhaps he would wave, or say a brief hello, or even ask if the boy needed help finding anything. But each time Mr. Rhodes took a small step forward, Jonah clutched the backpack tighter, as if reading Mr. Rhodes' intention. It wasn't shyness alone that Mr. Rhodes saw in the boy's eyes. It was alertness. Like a deer in a clearing that had heard a twig snap. Fearful and ready to flee. When the lunch bell rang, Jonah slipped out. Mr. Rhodes waited until the last echoes of footsteps died away before he locked the library doors for the next class period. That afternoon, he sat at his desk and wondered about the boy. Most children who found their way to the library did so for a purpose, maybe a class project, maybe a bit of escapism from the chaos of the cafeteria, maybe even the lure of computers in the reading corner. Jonah, however, seemed different. There was no sense of curiosity about him, no sense of relief. Only watchfulness. Mr. Rhodes couldn't have explained why Jonah's demeanor unsettled him so deeply, but he felt it in the pit of his stomach. In his 20 years here, he had seen children in countless states, bored, angry, depressed, joyful, even rebellious. But Jonah's quiet watchfulness had an intensity that set Mr. Rhodes on edge, though he couldn't yet label it as any specific kind of danger. By the second week of Jonah's appearances, Mr. Rhodes asked a few subtle questions around staff members he trusted. Some teachers recognized the boy's name, but none seemed to know much about him. The school counselor, Ms. Leland, only shrugged and said Jonah was new to the foster care system, placed somewhere in the district. She hadn't noticed anything remarkable beyond that. The boy kept to himself. His grades were average, his discipline record clean, and no teachers had reported anything unusual, except a lack of class participation. The system seldom flagged quiet kids unless they caused trouble or fell significantly behind. Mr. Rhodes kept an even closer eye on Jonah after that. He remained discreet, not wanting to provoke the boy's suspicion. He simply made sure that Jonah's corner was well lit, that no bullies hovered around him, that no immediate threat seemed present. Each day, Jonah came during lunch with the same heavy-looking backpack, stood in the same corner, barely moving, and left without a word. No progress. No meltdown. Nothing tangible Mr. Rhodes could cite as cause for concern, yet his gut told him otherwise. One afternoon, a hint of change finally arrived. The school bell had rung at the end of the day, and students poured into the hallways with the usual rush of voices and clatter of lockers. Mr. Rhodes stayed in the library to straighten books and wipe down a few tables. The sun's rays slanted in through the high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the quiet. He was just about to shut down the computer at his desk when he noticed a backpack left behind on the table in Jonah's usual spot. It was black, worn at the edges, with a few scuffs on the outer pockets. He crossed over, surprised to see it unclaimed. Jonah never left anything behind. If anything, the boy clutched that bag as if his life depended on it. Mr. Rhodes picked it up and felt the weight of it, unusually heavy, more so than he expected for a middle schooler's pack. And then he noticed the lock. A padlock, not just a small combination lock for a zipper. A sturdy silver padlock latched onto the main compartment, preventing anyone from looking inside. Mr. Rhodes frowned and turned the bag over in his hands. The usual zippers were there, but they were secured with a small chain that looped through the zipper holes and ended in that padlock. He shook the backpack gently, and something inside shifted, papers, perhaps, or small items that clunked dully together. For the first time, a ripple of genuine alarm flickered through him. He glanced around the library, which was now empty. Where was Jonah? Why had he left his precious backpack behind? Mr. Rhodes went to his office and tried calling the front office to see if any staff were still around, but it was late enough that he got only an automated voicemail. The counselor's line rang through without answer. The day staff, it seemed, had gone home. Unease settled in Mr. Rhodes' stomach. He thought about just leaving the backpack in the lost and found or turning it into the main office, but something about that padlock gave him pause. He decided to keep it locked in the library office until he could speak with someone who might know what to do next. The possibility of something illicit, drugs, a weapon, or stolen property, flashed across his mind, but that struck him as incongruous with Jonah's fearful manner. Yet he couldn't discount the notion entirely. All he knew for certain was that the backpack's secrecy mattered intensely to the boy who owned it. He stored the bag in a cupboard beneath his desk and locked it with the library's spare key, an extra layer of caution that felt simultaneously logical and invasive. That night, Mr. Rhodes found himself restless, his mind looping back to Jonah's face, that quiet tension in the boy's eyes, the sense of a ticking clock whenever Jonah was around. If the contents of that bag were so important, what could possibly drive Jonah to leave it behind? The next morning, Jonah arrived even before first bell, nearly colliding with Mr. Rhodes in the hallway outside the library. His eyes were wide, a film of desperation swirling in them. He panted slightly, as if he had run from the bus to the library. He asked breathlessly if anyone had found a lost backpack. Mr. Rhodes tried to sound reassuring as he nodded and told Jonah to wait in the library while he made a phone call to the assistant principal and the counselor. The boy's response was telling. Jonah simply sat at a table, folded his hands over his knees, and stared at the floor. He didn't protest, didn't argue, didn't try to vanish as he usually did. He just waited. It took a few minutes, but eventually the assistant principal, Mr. Finch, and the counselor, Ms. Leland, arrived. Together, they brought Jonah and the backpack into Mr. Rhodes' small office. The blinds were partially drawn, letting in a muted morning glow. The desk lamp cast a soft circle of light on the worn wooden surface. Jonah's eyes darted nervously, but he cooperated when asked if they could unlock the backpack to see its contents, maybe to confirm it was truly his or to ensure there was no immediate threat. Jonah produced a small key from his pants pocket. He handed it over without speaking. His gaze stayed firmly on the scuffed toes of his sneakers. When the padlock clicked open, the air in the office felt suddenly thinner. Mr. Rhodes and Ms. Leland stared, almost in disbelief, at what lay inside. A composition notebook, a series of neatly folded papers, and a map drawn in colored pencil. The notebook's cover was worn and scuffed, and the pages inside carried dense, meticulous handwriting. The food log, scribbled with times and dates, lined up with numbers indicating missed meals or small portions. And the map of Jonah's neighborhood displayed streets marked in green and red, safe zones and danger zones. When Mr. Rhodes gently flipped open the composition book, the pit of his stomach seemed to drop. Jonah had documented punishments that chilled the blood, withheld meals, enforced silence during dinner, locked isolation in a dark closet, ice-cold showers. One entry was particularly gut-wrenching. Jonah was forced to eat spoiled food to prove gratitude, despite not feeling hungry. Another page described standing for hours at a time, as though it were some twisted show of obedience. Mr. Rhodes had read enough. He set the notebook down, heart pounding. The words told a story of cruelty carried out with eerie consistency. Jonah's foster parents, apparently well-versed in the foster care system, had structured their abuse in ways that left no bruises, at least not physical ones. Emotional and psychological scars, however, were scrawled all over these pages. For a moment, no one spoke. A hush filled the office. Even Mr. Finch, who was rarely at a loss for words, looked pale and apprehensive. Finally, Ms. Leland put a hand on Jonah's shoulder and asked if he wanted to talk about any of it. Jonah shook his head. He seemed braced for an eruption of anger or punishment, as though he expected to be called a liar. But the adults in the room understood this was no fabrication. Mr. Finch asked Jonah if he had told anyone before, and Jonah's response was a barely audible "no." He explained, in a voice that cracked slightly, that he had tried to keep a similar record in another notebook, but his foster mother found it months ago and destroyed it. They told him he was being manipulative by writing such things. That no one would believe him if he tried to show others. This second notebook he kept under lock and key, discovered in a dusty corner of the school building. That lock was the only way Jonah knew to protect his evidence. What followed felt surreal and immediate. Child Protective Services was contacted. The day blurred as people in suits arrived. Introductions were made, calls were placed, and an official investigation was started. Jonah, quiet through it all, kept his arms wrapped around his torso, as though trying to hold himself together. It was only once the CPS officer gently led him out of the school, promising a safe placement, that the reality struck Mr. Rhodes. Jonah would not be returning to that foster home. Not tonight. Likely never again. Yet Mr. Rhodes knew this was only the beginning. A single day's revelation wouldn't guarantee Jonah's permanent safety. The system was labyrinthine, with countless forms, hearings, and evaluations. The foster parents had apparently passed every previous check, managed to maintain a shining facade for social workers, and cultivated a squeaky clean public image. People like that often knew how to twist truths and exploit loopholes. Mr. Rhodes had seen it before, not to this extreme, but enough to know that for Jonah, the coming weeks or months would be tumultuous, potentially dangerous. Abusers who felt threatened could lash out in new and unpredictable ways. At first, Mr. Rhodes believed the wheels of justice might turn quickly, especially with a notebook full of excruciating detail. But a few days later, he was told that the district wanted to keep the matter quiet. No big media involvement, no staff discussions that might blow the situation out of proportion. People like Mr. Finch and the principal, Ms. Adair, framed it as a matter of protecting Jonah's privacy. Mr. Rhodes suspected it was more about avoiding a scandal. Jonah was placed in a temporary group home while the authorities investigated. Mr. Rhodes discovered that group homes were often underfunded and crowded. Still, it was presumably a safer environment than the place he had come from. Every night, Mr. Rhodes found his thoughts drifting to that quiet figure in the corner of the library, the boy who never checked out a book but documented every detail of his pain. Sleep became difficult, haunted by the memory of Jonah's eyes, wide, sad, and too guarded for someone his age. Over the next week, Mr. Rhodes decided to visit Jonah. The process involved some red tape, but eventually he secured permission through the group home staff. He arrived one afternoon with a bag of paperbacks from the library, unsure if Jonah would find them comforting. The building was a squat structure of old brick, windows lined with bars. The reception area smelled faintly of disinfectant and overcooked cafeteria meals. Mr. Rhodes signed in and waited, anxiety writhing in his stomach. When Jonah finally emerged from a hallway lined with metal doors, Mr. Rhodes almost didn't recognize him. He wore an oversized sweater, his hair slightly messy, and he moved as if each step required permission. Mr. Rhodes greeted him quietly, unsure of how to proceed. Jonah's expression was unreadable, but he nodded and asked about the library. Mr. Rhodes found himself smiling slightly, relieved that Jonah was at least speaking to him. He offered the books he had brought, explaining that they were mysteries, short stories, and a few adventure novels. Nothing too heavy, but maybe something to pass the time. Jonah took them, scanning the covers with a strange, hesitant curiosity. Then he set them on his lap and thanked Mr. Rhodes with a soft voice. As they sat there in the group home's lounge, Mr. Rhodes could feel the tension in Jonah's posture. The boy was used to being vigilant, always watching for the next blow, the next punishment, even in this setting. Staff bustled in the background. A handful of other kids drifted in and out. Some stared at Jonah with mild curiosity. Others paid no heed. Jonah seemed caught between relief at seeing a familiar face and the fear that trusting anyone might backfire again. "I'm sorry you had to leave like that," Mr. Rhodes said. "But I'm glad you're not over there anymore." Jonah shrugged. "They told me they found cameras at the house. The social workers said it's evidence now." His voice was oddly detached, as if relaying a weather report. "I don't know what happens next." The quiet resignation in his words burned in Mr. Rhodes' chest. "Sometimes these things take time," he responded carefully. "But you did the right thing by documenting it all. You're brave, Jonah." Jonah dropped his gaze. "I'm not," he whispered. "I was just scared." They sat for a while longer, conversation stilted but slowly warming. Mr. Rhodes discovered that Jonah loved animals, especially dogs, though he had never owned one. He enjoyed building things with Legos, which his previous foster parents often locked away as part of discipline. By the end of the visit, Mr. Rhodes felt a strong urge to protect this child, to shield him from further damage. But he wasn't a relative, wasn't a social worker, wasn't anything official. He was just a school librarian who had stumbled onto Jonah's truth. In the ensuing weeks, Mr. Rhodes' life took on a strange, double rhythm. By day, he worked his usual job in the library, assisting students, managing overdue book notices, and ordering new materials. By late afternoon or evening, he became embroiled in phone calls to protective services, reading up on the complexities of the foster system, occasionally dropping by the group home with more books or small treats for Jonah and the other kids. He learned about the labyrinthine processes that governed foster care, the numerous evaluations, the home inspections, the background checks. He also learned that Jonah's case, while serious, was not entirely unique. There were other children placed with manipulative or abusive caregivers, children who slipped through the cracks because they left no physical bruises. Mr. Rhodes felt outraged by how easily the system could be fooled. Jonah's foster parents had passed every official check. Their home was neat, devoid of obvious hazards, and they had spoken the language social workers wanted to hear. Words like structure, discipline, trauma-informed approach had disguised a house of horrors where children were systematically tormented. Mr. Rhodes recalled the entries in Jonah's notebook describing the locked pantry cabinets, the forced consumption of spoiled food, the isolation in a storage closet. He could almost taste the bitterness of that reality. Sometimes, Mr. Rhodes visited the main office, hoping to speak with the principal about the broader issues. Could the district do more to expose these foster parents? To protect Jonah and others like him? But Ms. Adair, the principal, walked a careful line, cautioning him about discussing an ongoing child welfare investigation. She repeated that the district had to tread lightly to avoid legal entanglements. She insisted their silence was to protect Jonah's privacy, but Mr. Rhodes suspected it was a shield for the school's reputation. Stories of a severely abused foster child could attract media scrutiny and unwelcome questions. While Mr. Rhodes fought frustration with the bureaucratic hush, he discovered small pockets of allyship. Ms. Leland, the counselor, confided that she was appalled by the system's inertia. She had started reaching out to local advocacy groups in an attempt to rally support for Jonah. A few other teachers expressed quiet support, though they, too, feared stepping out of line. Everyone seemed to believe that if they just followed protocol, eventually the truth would come to light in court. But Mr. Rhodes knew that abusers often wriggled out of consequences with cunning maneuvering. The lines in Jonah's notebook described a routine so carefully choreographed, designed not to leave a mark. A part of Mr. Rhodes worried that Jonah's foster parents might return, brandishing polished excuses, or wage a smear campaign against Jonah to discredit him. Worse, Mr. Rhodes feared for Jonah's emotional well-being. Every day that the case dragged on, the boy's future grew more uncertain. Despite evidence that seemed ironclad, the complexities of due process meant that resolution could be far off. At the library, Mr. Rhodes found it increasingly difficult to focus on the mundane tasks of shelving books and helping students find reference materials. His thoughts looped endlessly around the question, what if Jonah needs more than the system can provide? He told himself he was just a concerned adult, not a parent, never had been. He lived alone in a small, modest home a few miles away from the school. His living room was lined with bookshelves, his bedroom was sparse, and he had a single reading chair by the window. He had never entertained the thought of fostering or adopting. Yet the more he visited Jonah, the more he felt an unspoken bond forming. The next few weeks brought a fresh wave of developments. Child Protective Services conducted a home visit at the foster's residence and found exactly what Jonah had described: cameras hidden in corners, motion sensors placed at child height, locked food cabinets, and a bedroom stripped of personal belongings. The fosters claimed it was for sensory management, presenting themselves as experts in dealing with traumatized children. But the CPS discovered more than enough to warrant removing Jonah permanently and launching a deeper investigation into their past fostering records. A 17-year-old girl who had previously lived in that same home came forward after hearing whispers of an investigation. She revealed that she, too, had faced the same brand of psychological torment, praised in public, berated and controlled in private. Her testimony cracked the fosters' shining facade even further. Though they continued to deny wrongdoing, the tide of evidence was rising against them. Mr. Rhodes learned that the fosters were employing an attorney and spinning the narrative that these children were troubled and untrustworthy. That enraged him. Jonah, who had meticulously collected evidence for his own survival, was being painted as manipulative. The fosters claimed that he was staging drama to gain attention. As if a child so frightened he could barely speak would orchestrate a grand conspiracy. Mr. Rhodes realized that in a courtroom anything could be twisted, especially by people with resources and unscrupulous cunning. Despite these complexities, Mr. Rhodes found hope in how determined some of the social workers seemed. Ms. Garcia, a lead CPS investigator, met with Mr. Rhodes personally to discuss Jonah's demeanor in the library. She wanted to verify the authenticity of Jonah's claims, ensuring the timeline matched the boy's notes. Mr. Rhodes explained how Jonah had been coming to the library for weeks, always carrying the locked backpack, never checking out a book, forever watchful. It all aligned perfectly with the narrative that Jonah felt he had no safe space at home. Ms. Garcia nodded, scribbling on her notepad, promising that her agency would do everything in its power to protect Jonah and hold the fosters accountable. Weeks stretched into a month, then two. The investigation inched forward. Jonah remained in the group home, but Mr. Rhodes had serious doubts about the environment there. Tensions among the kids were high, and overburdened staff sometimes left older children to look after themselves. There were no immediate family members stepping up to take Jonah in. Each time Mr. Rhodes visited, he saw the same weary acceptance in Jonah's eyes. For a child who had endured so much, the group home wasn't exactly the relief Mr. Rhodes had hoped. It was merely a holding pattern. During one visit, Jonah told Mr. Rhodes he didn't sleep well. The noise and chaos at the group home reminded him, ironically, of the anxious vigilance he had learned under his foster parents' roof. He was always waiting for something to happen, for someone to lose their temper, for some staff member to come by with a set of harsh rules. He stuck close to the books Mr. Rhodes brought, reading late at night by the hallway lights that seeped through the crack beneath the dorm door. "I feel safer when I'm reading," Jonah admitted one afternoon, flipping through a novel about a boy who sailed around the world. "It's like I can go somewhere else." The words tugged at Mr. Rhodes' heart. He saw himself in those pages as a child, escaping into stories when he felt lonely or misunderstood. That was part of why he had become a librarian in the first place, to nurture a spark of hope or adventure in kids who needed it. Now, confronted with Jonah's vulnerable sincerity, Mr. Rhodes wondered if he should do more than just bring books. He began exploring the idea of fostering or adopting Jonah himself, though the thought terrified him more than he would ever admit. He knew how complicated the process could be. He had never had children, and at his age, The idea of suddenly taking on the role of a guardian was daunting. Still, the image of Jonah drifting from one uncertain placement to another, possibly slipping through the cracks again, gnawed at him. He sought advice from Ms. Garcia, who told him that if he was serious, he could start by becoming a certified foster parent. It would mean training classes, home inspections, background checks, the works. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Ms. Garcia asked him one late afternoon in her office. Her voice was kind, yet measured. "Jonah will need a lot of support. He's been through unimaginable trauma, and his trust in adults is fragile." Mr. Rhodes wasn't sure he was ready at all. But he couldn't shake the conviction that Jonah needed someone who genuinely cared. The last thing the boy needed was another caretaker who might let him down. So Mr. Rhodes told Ms. Garcia he would sign up for the classes and see what happened. She seemed pleased by his willingness but cautioned him that the foster's legal team might object. After all, Mr. Rhodes was a witness in the case, a man with an obvious bias against them. They might argue that giving Jonah to him would prejudice the child further. But Ms. Garcia believed the courts would side with the child's best interest if it came to that. So Mr. Rhodes embarked on an unexpected journey. An older bachelor, known for his dusty library and meticulously neat home, now diving headlong into the complexities of foster parent certification. He told few people at first, just Ms. Leland, who gave him an encouraging pat on the shoulder, and Ms. Garcia, who facilitated some of the paperwork. He didn't want to make empty promises to Jonah in case everything fell through. The last thing the boy needed was more disappointment. As Mr. Rhodes delved into training sessions, learning about trauma-informed care, healthy discipline methods, and the emotional roller coaster that foster children often ride, he found himself reflecting on his own childhood. He was raised by kindly but distant parents, more interested in traveling and social clubs than spending time with their son. Books had been his companions. Now, decades later, could he be the adult caretaker that Jonah needed? The process was neither quick nor easy. Meanwhile, the foster's case wound its way through the legal system. Their lawyer argued vigorously that Jonah had exaggerated his claims. They tried to paint the 17-year-old girl's testimony as a bitter outburst from a problem child. They insisted that locking the pantry and installing cameras had been recommended by a private therapist to help children with behavioral issues. On the surface, it sounded plausible if one didn't read the explicit details in Jonah's notebook. But Ms. Garcia and her colleagues had those details, as well as the physical evidence from the house. The foster's manipulative veneer was beginning to crack in the eyes of the investigators, but the final court decision was still pending. In the midst of all this, Mr. Rhodes faced unexpected challenges at work. News of the investigation had quietly spread among some staff. A few worried parents caught wind of something serious happening in the library. Rumors circulated that Mr. Rhodes might have overstepped boundaries or that a child had been found with contraband. Administrators tried to quash the gossip, but in a school, rumors had a life of their own. Mr. Rhodes found himself fielding suspicious glances in the hallway or awkward questions about that kid. Some teachers thanked him for doing the right thing. Others seemed uncomfortable with the entire situation, preferring ignorance over involvement. Despite the social awkwardness, Mr. Rhodes persisted. His after-school visits to Jonah became the highlight of his week. They talked about everything from science fiction novels to the funny habits of the group home's resident cat, which prowled the halls at night. Jonah's guard gradually lowered. He shared small memories of living in different foster homes before this last nightmare. He confessed that he sometimes had nightmares about returning to that locked closet, or being forced to recite lines about gratitude while choking down spoiled food. One evening, Jonah asked Mr. Rhodes in a near whisper, "Did you ever have to do something crazy just to make people believe you?" Mr. Rhodes thought carefully before answering. "I had to stand up for something I believed in once when I was younger. It wasn't anything like what you're going through. But yes, I've had times where I felt nobody was listening. Sometimes you do have to go to extraordinary lengths." Jonah nodded slowly. "That's why I wrote everything down. They kept telling me nobody would believe me if I told. So I thought if I have proof." He trailed off, and Mr. Rhodes saw tears glistening at the corners of his eyes. The boy quickly wiped them away with his sleeve. "You did the right thing," Mr. Rhodes assured him. Without that notebook, it would have been your word against theirs. And we both know how they twist words. They do, Jonah murmured. They can make anything sound good if someone's not looking too close. Weeks turned into months. Mr. Rhodes completed his foster training classes, prepared his home to meet the requirements, including clearing out his office to create a second bedroom, and felt an odd mixture of excitement and trepidation. He kept the adoption possibility to himself, telling only Ms. Leland and Ms. Garcia. He wanted to see how Jonah felt about the idea. He didn't want to thrust himself into the boy's life without consent. When he finally mustered the courage to speak to Jonah about it, the boy's response was cautious. They sat together in a quiet corner of the group home's lounge, away from prying ears. Mr. Rhodes explained that he was trying to become a certified foster parent and that, if Jonah wanted, he could consider living with him as a placement rather than staying in the group home. He tried to keep his tone gentle, giving Jonah space to react. Jonah stared at his hands, turning them over as if searching for a sign. Eventually he said, "Do you really want to do that?" I'm not easy. I have nightmares. And I don't talk much sometimes." Mr. Rhodes reached out and placed a hand gently on Jonah's arm. "It won't be easy, but I want you to have somewhere safe, if the court allows it. I won't force you, Jonah. It's your choice." Jonah looked up, his eyes revealing a flicker of longing. "I'd like that," he said quietly, as if unsure whether he was allowed to say it out loud. "But I don't want you to get in trouble." "Don't worry about me," Mr. Rhodes said, smiling softly. "You've been through enough. Let the adults handle the trouble." While the process rolled forward, the Fosters' trial date loomed. They had been charged with multiple counts of child endangerment and abuse. Evidence stacked up against them, including the teenage girl's testimony and the trove of items found at the house. Attempts at intimidation weren't out of the question, and Mr. Rhodes received an unmarked letter one day in his school mailbox containing typed words, "Stop digging or you'll regret it." It wasn't signed, but it left Mr. Rhodes trembling behind closed doors. He showed it to Ms. Garcia, who advised him to remain vigilant and possibly alert the police. He did file a police report, though there was little they could do without a lead. The Fosters denied any involvement. Mr. Rhodes suspected they might have connections or allies who operated under the radar. Abusers often networked or knew how to threaten people into silence. Tension escalated a notch. Mr. Rhodes found himself glancing over his shoulder when walking to his car at night. The librarian's life, once a quiet routine of cataloging and caretaker duties, had become a swirl of potential danger. Yet the thought of Jonah stuck in a system that might fail him spurred Mr. Rhodes on. He pressed forward, refusing to back down even when anxiety gnawed at him. The school district maintained its official silence, trying to avoid a media storm. This left Mr. Rhodes feeling isolated in his fight. He had no illusions about being a savior. He simply understood that if Jonah slipped away now, the boy might never fully escape his abuser's shadow. The Fosters might manipulate the courts or find some other unscrupulous angle, especially with their stable of lawyers. Sometime around the midpoint of the investigation, Ms. Garcia confirmed that the judge overseeing Jonah's case was open to considering alternative placements. If Mr. Rhodes' home passed inspection, Jonah could be placed with him under a provisional foster agreement, pending the outcome of the Fosters' trial. It wasn't a guaranteed adoption, but it was a significant step. On a crisp late autumn day, Mr. Rhodes got word that he had passed all the essential background checks. He had transformed his guest room into a space for Jonah, complete with a small desk and a twin bed. He hadn't known whether Jonah preferred sports or music posters, so he left the walls mostly blank, except for a few posters of famous historical libraries. He figured Jonah could decorate as he pleased. The state social worker who came to inspect the home found it clean, cozy, and in compliance with guidelines. After an interminable wait, the day arrived when Jonah was officially moved from the group home to Mr. Rhodes' house. The boy arrived with a small duffel bag that contained a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and the books Mr. Rhodes had given him. That was all he had in the world. Jonah's eyes took in the living room with quiet curiosity. He set the duffel down near the couch, then followed Mr. Rhodes down the hallway to see his new room. "You can arrange it any way you like," Mr. Rhodes said, heart pounding as he realized the gravity of the moment. I want you to feel at home." Jonah walked around the room, touched the desk surface, tested the bed by pressing his hand onto the mattress. Then he slowly turned, gave Mr. Rhodes a small, almost shy smile, and said, "Thank you." It was such a simple word, but it carried the weight of everything Jonah had endured. Mr. Rhodes felt tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. He cleared his throat, hoping Jonah wouldn't notice. "Of course, this is your space now." They spent the rest of that evening establishing small rituals that would become their new normal. Mr. Rhodes showed Jonah how to operate the washing machine, where to find glasses in the kitchen, how to switch on the lamp in the living room for reading. Jonah listened intently, nodded, and asked a few quiet questions. Before bed, Jonah hesitated near the front door, checking the lock a few times, as if uncertain that no one would burst in. Mr. Rhodes gently reassured him that no one was coming to take him away without a legal mandate. That night, Mr. Rhodes lay awake, his mind swirling with a mixture of relief and fear. He was relieved Jonah was under his roof, away from immediate harm, but he fretted about the Fosters possibly retaliating. His phone was next to him, volume turned up, in case anything happened. He knew fostering a traumatized boy wouldn't be simple. Jonah would carry scars that wouldn't heal overnight. Yet Mr. Rhodes felt an unwavering conviction that he would do everything in his power to help Jonah find peace. In the days that followed, Jonah slowly adapted to life with Mr. Rhodes. He ventured out of his room, watched documentaries on the small television in the living room, asked if he could help cook dinner. The boy was surprisingly adept at following recipes, though he initially seemed uneasy about the availability of food. He kept checking the pantry as if expecting it to be locked. Mr. Rhodes encouraged him to snack whenever he liked, took him grocery shopping to let him pick out favorite foods, and never once scolded him for rummaging in the fridge. At school, Jonah resumed classes, though he still avoided socializing much. The difference was that he no longer spent lunch hiding in the library. Occasionally, he would still drop by to see Mr. Rhodes, but more often he opted to eat in the cafeteria, where he could at least watch the chaotic swirl of student life from a vantage point that no longer terrified him. Some of the teachers noticed the shift, though Jonah remained quiet. A few staff members had heard that Mr. Rhodes was now Jonah's foster parent, and they regarded both with a mixture of curiosity and relief. Perhaps the rumors had blown out of proportion, or perhaps the librarian had simply stepped up to help a child in crisis. Meanwhile, the Foster's case escalated into a formal trial. Mr. Rhodes was subpoenaed to testify, as his discovery of the backpack and Jonah's documents was central to the evidence. Ms. Garcia prepared him for the possibility that the Foster's attorney might try to discredit him, painting him as an overzealous staff member who crossed boundaries. Mr. Rhodes tried to steel himself for that line of attack. He reread the lines from Jonah's notebook in his mind, remembering the voice that leaked off the pages: hungry, fearful, determined. Those words were burned into his memory, making him resolute. He would not be intimidated into silence. Jonah had taken a risk in trusting him, and Mr. Rhodes wouldn't betray that trust. The day he testified was nerve-wracking. The courthouse was a squat, modern building, its gray corridors bustling with lawyers, plaintiffs, defendants, and people waiting for their turn in crowded courtrooms. Mr. Rhodes wore a pressed suit he hadn't donned in years. The tie felt uncomfortably tight around his neck. Jonah was not present in the courtroom that day. The attorneys had decided it was best for him to appear only when giving his own statement. Mr. Rhodes stepped up to the witness stand, heart pounding so loudly in his ears he could barely hear the bailiff administer the oath. He spoke calmly about how he first noticed Jonah in the library, how the boy clung to his backpack, and how Mr. Rhodes found that padlocked bag after school. He described the notebook's contents, the map with red zones marking Jonah's home, and the terrifying accounts of withheld meals and forced punishments. Throughout his testimony, the Foster's attorney glared at him, occasionally interjecting with technical objections about hearsay or speculation. Mr. Rhodes stuck to the facts as best he could, though his voice trembled slightly when recalling the moment they opened the backpack. Then came cross-examination. The Foster's attorney wore a crisp navy suit and carried a stack of papers. She tried to imply that Mr. Rhodes had no formal training in child psychology, that perhaps he had misread the situation or, even worse, had coerced Jonah into writing those things. The suggestions were ludicrous, but Mr. Rhodes forced himself to remain courteous and factual. The attorney eventually shifted tactics to insinuate that Mr. Rhodes was seeking attention or hero status, as evidenced by his decision to foster Jonah afterward. Mr. Rhodes answered that he acted solely out of concern for the boy's welfare, not for recognition. His voice remained firm, though the insinuations stung. After nearly an hour of questioning, he stepped down from the stand, exhaustion weighing on him. Ms. Garcia gave him a small nod, indicating he had done well. The Fosters, sitting at the defense table, barely glanced at him. Their expressions were impassive, but the tension in their shoulders was evident. Mr. Rhodes left the courtroom feeling hollowed out, the swirl of legal procedures turning his stomach. He could only hope that his testimony, combined with the hard evidence from Jonah's notebook and the other witnesses, would seal the Fosters' fate. In the weeks that followed, Jonah himself was prepped to testify. It was an emotional process, guided by a child advocate who tried to ensure Jonah wouldn't be re-traumatized on the stand. Mr. Rhodes wanted to be there, but the legal counsel recommended Jonah go through it with minimal outside interference, so as not to suggest coaching. The evening before Jonah's scheduled testimony, the boy was quieter than usual, picking at his dinner and retreating to his room. Mr. Rhodes knocked softly, found Jonah sitting on the bed, knees pulled to his chest. "They'll believe you," Mr. Rhodes said, settling down on the edge of the bed. "The notebook speaks for itself." Jonah nodded, eyes downcast. "I keep thinking about the first time they locked me in the closet," he murmured. "It smelled like mildew and old shoes. I was in there for hours, and I kept telling myself I'd never forget. I didn't want to forget, so I wrote it all down. But what if they twist it so I look like I'm lying?" Mr. Rhodes felt a surge of protectiveness. He placed a hand gently on Jonah's shoulder. "They'll try," he admitted. "But you're not alone in this. Ms. Garcia, the judge, and everyone who's seen the evidence, they know what happened. You just tell the truth. No one can take that away from you." Jonah closed his eyes as though absorbing the words. Then he let out a shaky breath and whispered, "I'll try." The next day, Mr. Rhodes waited outside the courtroom, nerves fraying as time crawled. When Jonah finally emerged with the child advocate, his face was streaked with tears. Mr. Rhodes rushed over, but the advocate placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "He did fine," she whispered. "He was brave. It was hard, but he got through it." Jonah looked up at Mr. Rhodes, his eyes red. "They asked me a lot of questions. It was hard," he said. "But I told them everything." Mr. Rhodes felt an overwhelming wave of relief and sorrow for the ordeal. He wanted to whisk Jonah away from these sterile courthouse walls and let him forget. But they still had to wait for the verdict, which wouldn't come until the end of the trial. The Fosters continued to posture, insisting on their innocence. Their attorney hammered home the point that no official complaints had been filed during Jonah's time with them, neglecting that Jonah had never felt safe enough to do so, a fact that was all too common among abused children. The prosecution countered by showcasing the hidden cameras, the locked pantry, the testimony of 2 separate children who had lived in that home. Publicly, the Fosters acted as though they were victims of a smear campaign orchestrated by troubled youths. The tension built relentlessly, overshadowing the day-to-day routines of Mr. Rhodes and Jonah. Though living together had brought them a semblance of comfort and normalcy, the impending conclusion of the trial loomed like a storm on the horizon. Jonah's nightmares sometimes returned. He would wake in the middle of the night, stumbling into the hallway, eyes wide with panic. Mr. Rhodes would gently guide him back to bed, assure him that the door was never locked, that he was free to come and go. "You're safe here," Mr. Rhodes would whisper, though each time he felt a pang of guilt that such reassurance was even necessary. Eventually, the day of closing arguments arrived. The Fosters' attorney repeated her chorus of claims that the children were simply misunderstood, that the locked doors and cameras were recommended by a private therapist. The prosecutor methodically dismantled these excuses, pointing to the cruelty documented in Jonah's notebook, the testimony from another victim, the physical evidence in the home. The Fosters sat stiffly, their expressions betraying flashes of anger. Mr. Rhodes wasn't in the courtroom that day, but he heard the account from Ms. Garcia, who said the Fosters had grown visibly rattled when the prosecution declared them unfit to even own a pet, let alone raise a child. The jury deliberated for almost 3 days. Each day, Mr. Rhodes and Jonah tried to go about their routines: school, the library, dinners at home, the occasional quiet evenings spent reading or watching a nature documentary. But each night, the tension was palpable. Jonah asked every few hours if Ms. Garcia had called, if there was any update, if the Fosters could possibly win and force him back. Mr. Rhodes reminded him that with so much evidence, the Fosters had little chance of escaping conviction. But until the verdict was announced, fear lingered. Finally, word came. The Fosters were found guilty on multiple counts of child abuse, endangerment, and neglect. They would serve prison time, and their licenses to foster were permanently revoked. The official sentencing would come later, but the immediate effect was that Jonah's case ended conclusively in his favor. Ms. Garcia phoned to deliver the news with a note of triumph in her voice. Mr. Rhodes thanked her, then stood in the kitchen, the phone still in his hand, exhaling a shaky breath he felt he'd been holding for months. Jonah was in the living room, arms wrapped around his knees, staring at a nature program about whales. Mr. Rhodes sank onto the couch next to him. "It's over," he said softly. "They were found guilty. They can't come after you anymore." For a long moment, Jonah remained quiet, eyes fixed on the swimming whales on TV. Then tears began sliding down his cheeks. He tried to wipe them away, but they kept coming. Mr. Rhodes put an arm around him, and Jonah leaned into his side. The two stayed like that for several minutes, the weight of relief and the echo of past terror mingling into silent sobs. Even though the Fosters were convicted, there was still the question of Jonah's long-term placement. By this point, Mr. Rhodes had completed most of the foster requirements and had even begun exploring official adoption procedures. Jonah still struggled with the concept that someone truly wanted to adopt him. He asked Mr. Rhodes one day, voice trembling, "Are you sure you want me around forever?" Mr. Rhodes gently cupped Jonah's shoulder. "I want to be there for you, for as long as you need," he said. "You don't have to decide anything right now. But if you want to be part of my family, I'd be honored." Over the next few months, they navigated the adoption process, with Ms. Garcia helping to smooth out the red tape. Jonah had to meet with a court-appointed advocate to discuss his feelings. He was initially shy, but when asked directly if he wanted Mr. Rhodes to adopt him, he managed a small, firm nod. In the final hearing, the judge considered the entire history, the traumatic experiences, the stable environment Mr. Rhodes provided, and Jonah's own wishes. When the adoption was granted, Jonah's eyes shone with tears. Mr. Rhodes felt his own throat tighten with emotion. He recalled the moment he first saw Jonah in that library corner, the boy so guarded, so alone. Now, here they were, forging a new path, a new life. In the weeks after the adoption, Mr. Rhodes began to notice subtle changes in Jonah's demeanor. The boy no longer flinched at sudden noises, no longer obsessively checked the locks on the doors every few minutes. He left his bedroom door open at night, trusting that no one would barge in to punish him. He even joined an after-school club, the robotics club as it turned out. Building small machines and programming them to move in a designated path seemed to captivate him. Mr. Rhodes watched with pride as Jonah slowly, almost cautiously, discovered bits of normalcy. Despite the progress, Jonah still had moments of anxiety. He occasionally panicked if Mr. Rhodes arrived home late, worried that something terrible had happened. Therapy sessions with a counselor helped him sort through these fears and taught him coping strategies. But the bright side was that they were dealing with the trauma, no longer simply surviving it. By the end of that school year, Jonah's home life had transformed into something approximating stability. His bedroom was decorated with posters of galaxies and robotics diagrams, plus a few fantasy novel covers that Mr. Rhodes had framed for him. The old padlock that once guarded his secrets now rested inside a small wooden box on his bookshelf. He kept it as a reminder that he no longer needed to hide his notebook or his truth. Mr. Rhodes found himself enjoying fatherhood in ways he never expected. The morning routine of packing lunches, reminding Jonah to grab his homework, and walking him through the day's schedule gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. He realized that adopting Jonah didn't make him a hero, as some staff members half-jokingly said. It simply made him a man who had opened his life to a child who needed someone to show up, day after day, without fail. Eventually, Ms. Garcia called with one last update. The Fosters had been sentenced to prison terms of varying lengths. Another foster child who had once lived there also stepped forward, providing further confirmation of the systematic abuse. The Fosters were unlikely to see freedom for many years. Mr. Rhodes relayed the news to Jonah, who received it with a mixture of relief and lingering sadness, as though part of him still grieved the fact that people who were supposed to care for children could do something so cruel. From that point on, life slowly settled into a new normal. Jonah blossomed in small, steady increments. He invited a friend from robotics club to study at the house. He helped Mr. Rhodes reorganize the library's back storage, and he occasionally joined in friendly banter with Mr. Rhodes about which pizza toppings were best. The tension that once weighed on them both began to lift. At last, the day arrived when they hung Jonah's old map in a frame. It was the same map that had once been folded in his backpack, marking red danger zones and a few scattered green safe spots. Now the red marks had faded in significance. New green dots multiplied, highlighting Mr. Rhodes' home, the library, some friends' houses, the local park, and even the group home that had given him a provisional safe space. Jonah pinned it on the wall in his room, a symbol of how his world had changed. With everything drawing to a close, Mr. Rhodes could hardly believe how far they had come. They had trudged through the darkest corners of abuse and injustice, confronted manipulative monsters wearing respectable masks, and faced the labyrinth of the foster care system. Now, at last, Jonah was free from that environment. The Fosters had been held accountable, other children had come forward, and the district, though quiet and cautious, had at least supported Mr. Rhodes enough to let him adopt Jonah without further complication. One warm summer evening, Jonah and Mr. Rhodes sat on the porch steps, sipping lemonade. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of gold and violet. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. Jonah asked softly, "Why do you think some people do what they did? Why take kids if they just want to hurt them?" Mr. Rhodes sighed. "I don't know. Maybe for money from the foster system, or maybe they enjoy having control. Whatever the reason, it's wrong. But you expose them. They won't hurt anyone else." Jonah stared at his cup. "I still have nightmares sometimes." "It might take time," Mr. Rhodes admitted. "Healing isn't always quick. But you're not alone anymore." A small smile touched Jonah's lips. "I know." They watched the sun vanish, the sky deepening into night. Crickets began to sing in the yard. Jonah finished his lemonade and leaned his head briefly on Mr. Rhodes' shoulder. In that simple gesture, Mr. Rhodes felt a surge of gratitude for how their lives had intertwined. The next day, Mr. Rhodes took down an empty box from a closet shelf and handed it to Jonah in his room. Inside the box went the notebook from Jonah's backpack, still carefully preserved. The battered composition book carried the truth that had set him free. Jonah hesitated, then placed it inside, next to the old padlock. They closed the lid gently, like tucking away a painful chapter, not to erase it, but to honor the fact that it was over. When the new school year started, Jonah walked into the building beside Mr. Rhodes, who was juggling a stack of new library materials. The boy's posture was straighter, his eyes more aware of the possibilities around him. Students bustled past, some giving Jonah quick nods of recognition, and he returned those nods without shrinking back. The library would always be a refuge for him, but now he also felt safe enough to walk the cafeteria or the hallways without that old sense of dread. In the final aftermath, Mr. Rhodes saw the difference not just in Jonah, but also in himself. He discovered a well of patience and empathy he hadn't fully tapped before. They had come together under dire circumstances, forced to confront an evil that wore the mask of respectability. Yet in facing that darkness, they found a bond that felt like family. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be perfect, but it was real. One afternoon, they made a trip to the local bookstore, a monthly tradition they had established. Jonah had saved some allowance and wanted to find a new mystery series. As they stepped inside, the smell of fresh paper and coffee beans enveloped them. Jonah wandered the shelves with wonder in his eyes, pausing to flip through blurbs, while Mr. Rhodes trailed behind, smiling. It struck him, in that peaceful moment, that for all the heartbreak and tension they had endured, this was the quiet reward, to see Jonah confident enough to choose his own books in a public space without fear. When they left the bookstore, Jonah carried a bag with 2 novels tucked inside, sporting a grin that almost reached his ears. Mr. Rhodes felt his chest swell with pride. There would be other struggles, other difficulties with therapy, trust, and daily life. But the Foster's presence was finally banished from Jonah's horizon. The official adoption papers rested in a file cabinet in Mr. Rhodes' home. Their future, though not guaranteed, felt far more hopeful than it ever had. And so, as the summer turned to fall once more, Mr. Rhodes and Jonah settled into their life together with a new sense of normal. There were no locks on any doors. Pantry cabinets remained wide open. Privacy was respected, but secrecy was no longer the currency of survival. In Jonah's bedroom, near the framed map, Legos and books formed a happy clutter, evidence of a boy reclaiming his childhood. The cycle of fear had been broken, replaced by a gentle, day-by-day healing. Outside, the leaves began to turn gold and orange, drifting down in slow arcs across the lawn. Mr. Rhodes sometimes sat with Jonah on the porch, listening to wind chimes, reading side by side. Jonah's nightmares diminished in frequency. Therapy continued, each session unlocking a bit more of the trauma, letting Jonah process and let go. For Mr. Rhodes, the library at school remained his professional sanctuary, but now he returned home to the laughter and occasional teenage frustrations of a boy discovering his identity. They navigated new challenges, homework battles, decisions about curfew, the question of what kind of winter jacket Jonah wanted. Normal, everyday parent-child negotiations that might have once felt impossible. They cherished each one because they were symbols of a life no longer ruled by fear or cruelty. When the first snow fell that year, Jonah stood at the window, transfixed. He glanced back at Mr. Rhodes, who offered a smile. They both stepped outside into the swirl of flurries, the yard blanketed in soft white. Jonah tilted his head back, letting snowflakes catch on his eyelashes. Mr. Rhodes laughed, the sound echoing across the empty street. In that moment, the echoes of the past seemed quieter, overshadowed by the brightness of a new chapter. Though Jonah's experiences would stay with him, shaping him into a watchful and introspective teenager, they did not define his every breath anymore. He had found safety, and in safety, he discovered room to grow. Mr. Rhodes never forgot the day he picked up that padlocked backpack, how it felt like a turning point in both their lives. Now that weight had lifted. Jonah no longer needed a padlock to guard his secrets. He had people willing to listen, to believe him, to stand beside him through the worst storms. Late one evening, Jonah asked Mr. Rhodes if they could revisit the library, his library, after hours. Ms. Adair had given permission for Mr. Rhodes to have a spare key, so they walked through the darkened halls, their footsteps echoing, and slipped inside. Jonah wandered among the shelves, now at ease in the place where he once stood so timidly, hoping no one would notice. He paused in the corner where he used to hover with his backpack. Mr. Rhodes joined him, both of them staring at the spot as if it were a relic from another time. Jonah leaned down, ran a hand across the worn carpet, and said quietly, "I stood here, so scared all the time." Mr. Rhodes placed a gentle hand on Jonah's shoulder. "But not anymore," he said. Jonah nodded, exhaled softly, then straightened. Together, they strolled through the library aisles, memories colliding with the present, forging a sense of closure. Before they left, Jonah pulled a small slip of paper from his pocket, a note with a quote he had found in one of the books Mr. Rhodes had given him. He wedged it between 2 reference volumes. Mr. Rhodes caught a glimpse of it. It read, "Sometimes the bravest act is not running away, but letting yourself be found." Neither of them spoke as they left the library that night, hearts brimming with the knowledge that, in each other, they had both found something vital. In time, the Foster's prison sentences officially began. The teenage girl who had also testified found a supportive guardian and reached out to thank Jonah. Their stories had lent each other credibility, forging a bond in mutual survival. The media never exploded with the story, likely due to the district's deliberate hush, but the small circle of people who knew felt a quiet satisfaction that justice had indeed been served. Near the end of winter, on a day bright with sunshine reflecting off snowbanks, Mr. Rhodes and Jonah drove out to the county courthouse for a final piece of paperwork. When it was done, Jonah was officially listed as Mr. Rhodes' adopted son. They celebrated with a meal at a little diner that specialized in breakfast all day. Jonah devoured a plate of pancakes, eyes shining with a quiet joy that spoke volumes more than words could say. And in the final turning of the page, Mr. Rhodes found himself gazing at Jonah's framed map again. The red zones that once haunted Jonah's imagination had shrunk to insignificance, while the green ones multiplied. They both knew the past would always be part of Jonah's story, but it no longer dictated his future. Where there had been secrets and locked doors, there were now open discussions, laughter, and a sense of belonging. They had become a family by choice, forged in adversity and sealed by compassion. At the end of it all, Mr. Rhodes stood in the living room, reflecting on a journey that began with a silent boy in a library corner. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. Jonah was upstairs, probably reading or tinkering with a Lego set. Mr. Rhodes felt gratitude coursing through him, along with a bittersweet understanding that the world held darkness but also contained people willing to fight it. In that realization lay a sense of purpose he had never quite experienced before. So, to anyone hearing this tale, remember that sometimes a single locked backpack can change a life. Sometimes the smallest gesture, like noticing a quiet child, can unearth a hidden cry for help. We never know how far our compassion might carry someone, or how a single act of caring can break the chains of silence. If you believe that no truth should remain hidden and that every child deserves safety and love, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories that shine a light on injustice and hope. Thank you for watching, and for bearing witness to a story where the darkest secrets gave way to a brighter tomorrow.